The skeletal remains of Xylos Prime stood as a monument to human fury. Twisted metal girders, once reaching skyward in elegant spires, now skewered the polluted air like broken, blackened fingers. Craters, vast and deep, pockmarked the urban landscape, filled with the ghostly dust of what was once a vibrant, alien civilization. Smoke, thin and acrid, still curled lazily from distant ruins, a perpetual funeral pyre for countless lives extinguished. This wasn't merely a city, it was a scar, etched onto the very soul of a planet, a glaring testament to a war that had devoured decades and left nothing but desolation in its wake. But even amidst such utter destruction, a whisper of change, a flicker of hope, sometimes found purchase. What if one act of defiance, a single refusal to conform, could rewrite the entire fate of two warring species, pulling them back from the brink of total annihilation? This was the desolate canvas upon which Captain Eva Rostova now stood, her gaze sweeping across the apocalyptic vista from the command deck of her vessel, the UNS Dauntless. A human military officer forged in the crucible of this brutal galactic conflict, Eva was a woman defined by her strategic brilliance, and perhaps more remarkably, an unwavering moral compass that had somehow remained intact despite the horrors she had witnessed. Currently, she commanded a siege unit, a blunt instrument of war poised to deliver the final, crushing blow to the alien homeworld of Xylos. Her reputation preceded her, a tactician who consistently sought the most efficient path to victory, often minimizing collateral damage where others saw only targets. Yet, even her formidable intellect and resolve were being tested to their absolute limits. The air thrummed with the low growl of starship engines and the controlled chaos of a military preparing for its ultimate offensive. The final assault on the last Xylosian stronghold was imminent, a fortress nestled deep within the planet's most formidable mountain range, a desperate last stand. The orders echoing through the Terran Confederacy's chain of command were clear, chilling, and absolute: take no prisoners. This directive, a brutal decree of total eradication, was one that Eva had always wrestled with internally, a gnawing dissonance between military necessity and the fundamental humanity she still clung to. Every fiber of her being recoiled from it, even as her training demanded obedience. The weight of potential genocide pressed down on her, a suffocating cloak threatening to extinguish the last embers of her moral resistance. The war had stripped away so much, corroding the human spirit with each passing year, each calculated atrocity. Yet, Eva believed, no matter how faint, that a line still existed, a boundary humanity dare not cross if it wished to retain any semblance of its own soul. The final moments were ticking down, each second bringing her closer to an impossible choice, a decision that would either cement her place as a loyal, if ruthlessly efficient, officer, or brand her as a mutineer. The fate of two civilizations, teetering on the precipice of obliteration, hung precariously in the balance, waiting for one human to make a stand. Before we dive deeper into Eva's impossible choice and witness the pivotal moment that reshaped galactic history, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Join our cosmic journey through humanity's most pivotal moments, and never miss another incredible tale. The universe, after all, is full of untold stories. The universe, after all, is full of untold stories. The war between humanity and the Xylosians had metastasized into a gaping wound across the galaxy, a conflict measured not in years, but in generations, and marked by an unimaginable tally of casualties on both sides. Decades of relentless fighting had etched deep lines of exhaustion onto the faces of Eva's troops, turning vibrant young soldiers into weary, hardened veterans who barely remembered a time before the war. She saw the raw brutality of their existence firsthand, the way their eyes held a distant, haunted look, the almost clinical detachment with which they discussed enemy losses. Humanity, once a beacon of exploration and curiosity, had been twisted by fear and vengeance into something almost unrecognizable, a species capable of immense destruction cloaked in the grim uniform of self-preservation. The dehumanization of the Xylosians was complete, a necessary evil preached by military doctrine to justify the endless bloodshed. This pervasive ideology wasn't merely a byproduct of the war, it was its very fuel. The overwhelming military doctrine of the Terran Confederacy viewed the Xylosians not just as an enemy, but as an existential threat, a species whose very existence challenged humanity's dominance in the cosmos. Their official stance demanded nothing less than complete subjugation, or, failing that, eradication. This rigid, unforgiving stance found its most ardent and terrifying embodiment in General Thorn, Eva's immediate superior. Thorn was a relic of the war's earliest, darkest days, a man whose every word dripped with an unshakable conviction in humanity's absolute right to total victory, no matter the cost. His presence was a constant, suffocating pressure, a vocal reminder of the official policy that brooked no dissent, no mercy, no alternate path. His eyes, cold and steel-like, reflected a universe stripped bare of compassion, reduced to only predator and prey. Eva, however, refused to be entirely consumed by this predatory mindset. She relentlessly searched for any conceivable alternative, any loophole in the increasingly draconian orders. She presented strategies for breaching the stronghold that prioritized surgical strikes and incapacitation over wholesale destruction, arguing for minimal loss of life on both sides, believing that even in war, a measure of strategic restraint was not weakness, but foresight. Each attempt was met with the same dismissive glare from Thorn, the same curt refusal. "We finished this, Rostova," he'd snarled, his voice a gravelly rasp. "No compromises. No half measures." She tried to argue for the preservation of Zylosian historical sites, mentioning the cultural significance of the stronghold's ancient architecture and the potential scientific knowledge contained within its archives. She spoke of the irreversible loss to galactic understanding, regardless of who stood victorious. But Thorn saw only military targets, resources to be exploited or obstacles to be removed. Her pleas fell on deaf ears, bouncing off the impenetrable wall of his conviction, leaving her feeling increasingly isolated and powerless. The weight of every ignored suggestion, every overruled argument, pressed down on her, leaving a bitter taste of helplessness. The clock was ticking, and with each passing moment, the opportunity for a more humane victory seemed to recede further into the impossibly distant past. She knew that soon, she would face an order she could not obey. The clock was indeed ticking, and with each passing moment, the opportunity for a more humane victory seemed to recede further into the impossibly distant past. She knew that soon, she would face an order she could not obey. As the final hours before the scheduled assault relentlessly ticked away, new recon reports flooded Eva's command console, painting a picture far more disturbing than even her cynical expectations had anticipated. The stronghold, once believed to be a purely military installation, was now confirmed to be largely populated by civilian Zylosians. Her tactical readouts highlighted pockets of noncombatants, a heartbreaking array that included many young and elderly individuals, seeking shelter in the fortress's deepest, most heavily reinforced sections, alongside the remaining, battle-weary combatants. This wasn't merely a strategic objective, it was a sealed tomb, filled with innocence. Direct intelligence, painstakingly gathered from deep space probes and intercepted communications, further revealed the devastating truth: the Zylosian military within the stronghold was largely decimated. What remained was merely a token guard, a skeleton crew of weary soldiers whose primary purpose had shifted from active defense to the desperate, almost ceremonial protection of their last remaining civilians. Their weapons, barely functional, were more symbols of defiance than instruments of war. The scale of the Zylosian collapse was far greater than the Confederacy's propaganda machine had ever dared to admit, transforming the imminent assault from a decisive military engagement into a monstrous, premeditated massacre. A sharp, almost unbearable ache settled in Eva's chest, pulling her back across the chasm of time to a memory she usually kept locked away. She saw flashes of her own childhood, the idyllic green hills of her homeworld, before the first Zylosian incursions had shattered its peace. The searing orange glow on the horizon, the frantic scramble for shelter, the desperate goodbyes, the faces of her family, her younger sister, wide-eyed and terrified, her parents, stoic even as their world burned. They were among the countless casualties in the early stages of the war, victims of a conflict that spiraled out of control before anyone truly understood why it began. That personal loss had fueled her initial drive to join the military, to seek justice, to prevent such suffering from ever happening again. But now, staring at the holographic projections of Xylosian children huddled in underground bunkers, she realized that perpetuating the cycle of vengeance would only create more orphans, more grieving families, indistinguishable from her own. The faces of those Xylosian civilians were not so different from the faces in her memory. The internal conflict within Eva intensified, reaching a near breaking point. The order to exterminate, to unleash the full, devastating might of the Terran Confederacy upon these helpless beings, felt like a betrayal of everything she had ever believed in, a perversion of the very justice she sought. She grappled with an agonizing question: what truly was the cost of victory, if it meant the complete annihilation of a sentient species? Could humanity truly claim moral superiority, or even survival, if it descended to such depths of barbarity? The war had already inflicted immense pain on humanity, stealing lives, futures, and innocence. But to become the architects of another species' extinction, that was a wound from which humanity might never recover. The cold logic of military doctrine clashed violently with the burning embers of her conscience. She saw not just enemies, but beings with lives, with families, with histories, just like her own. The thought of bringing such devastation to them, knowing their helplessness, was a moral atrocity she felt she could not commit. Every fiber of her being screamed against it. The air in the command center felt thick, oppressive, as if the weight of her decision was physically pressing down on her. The faces of her fallen family members mingled with the projected faces of Xylosian children, blurring into a single, desperate plea for an end to the madness. The air in the command center felt thick, oppressive, as if the weight of her decision was physically pressing down on her. The faces of her fallen family members mingled with the projected faces of Xylosian children, blurring into a single, desperate plea for an end to the madness. Amidst this agonizing internal turmoil, the comlink flared, a harsh, insistent buzz cutting through the silence. General Thorne's face, grim and unyielding, materialized on the main screen, his eyes burning with an almost zealous intensity. His voice, amplified and distorted, echoed with finality. "Captain Rostova," he barked, his words sharp as shrapnel. "The assault commences in T-minus 60 minutes. I am issuing the final command personally. No quarter. No survivors. This is not a negotiation, Rostova. This is the end. We send an unequivocal message to any who would dare defy the Terran Confederacy. This war ends tonight definitively. Do you understand your orders, Captain?" Eva's hand instinctively tightened on the armrest of her command chair, her knuckles white. She understood the words, but the implications, the sheer barbarity of them, threatened to shatter her composure. Thorne's conviction was absolute, unclouded by any shred of doubt or compassion. He genuinely believed this was the only way, that wiping out the Xylosians entirely was a strategic necessity, a grim act of mercy to prevent future generations from suffering. He saw it as the ultimate deterrent, a statement carved in blood that would echo throughout the galaxy for millennia. But Eva saw only genocide, a path from which there could be no return, no redemption. She closed her eyes for a fleeting second, the image of those Xylosian children searing itself into her mind. Disobeying Thorne's direct order, especially one issued so unequivocally, would mean immediate repercussions. She meticulously considered the consequences: a court-martial, swift and brutal, followed by a public execution for insubordination, a traitor's death. The shame she would bring upon her family, even in their absence, would be immeasurable. Her unit, loyal and disciplined, would be implicated, their careers, perhaps even their lives, destroyed. She saw the headlines, the condemnations, the erasure of her legacy, replaced by the ignominy of defiance. The weight of her own life, and the lives of those under her command, hung precariously against the moral imperative she felt throbbing in her very soul. Could she sacrifice everything for a principle that the rest of the Confederacy seemed to have long abandoned? Was her conscience worth the destruction of her career, her life, her name? Then, as if in answer to her unspoken question, a flicker of light appeared on a secondary terminal. A data packet, hastily decrypted by her intelligence officer, Sergeant Cale, who had been diligently sifting through newly acquired Xylosian comms. It had been captured during a recent probing action, a seemingly innocuous burst of information amidst encrypted military chatter. Kale's voice, a low whisper from his station, reached her earpiece. "Captain, I think you'll want to see this. Ancient Xylosian, cultural data. Looks like it was archived within the Stronghold's core systems. Philosophical texts, historical records, art schematics, way more than just tactical information." Eva's gaze snapped to the terminal. The screen glowed, displaying fragmented images of intricate Xylosian calligraphy, complex mathematical equations, and beautifully rendered artistic projections. These weren't the crude, warmongering symbols humanity had been fed by its propaganda. These were traces of a civilization with depth, with a rich internal life, with a past far more complex and nuanced than the Terran Confederacy's simplistic narrative of a savage, existential threat suggested. The sheer volume and intellectual sophistication of the data hinted at a society that valued knowledge, beauty, and introspection, not merely conquest and destruction. It was a glimmer of hope, a tangible piece of evidence that perhaps, just perhaps, the Xylosians were not the monolithic evil her superiors painted them to be. This wasn't merely a strategic objective, it was a potential treasure trove of galactic understanding, a bridge to a past, and perhaps a future, that defied the brutality of the present. It was a spark, small but potent, igniting a new resolve within her. This wasn't just about saving lives, it was about saving truth, preserving the possibility of understanding, and perhaps, even peace. The choice suddenly felt clearer, though no less terrifying. The cost of obedience now seemed far greater than the cost of defiance. The cost of obedience now seemed far greater than the cost of defiance. The air grew heavy with an almost palpable dread as the final minutes evaporated. Klaxons began to wail across the fleet, a mournful, guttural sound announcing the impending assault. Human forces, a vast armada of ships and ground troops, were now fully poised, weapons systems charged to maximum, ready to breach the Xylosian stronghold and unleash their devastating payload. The tension was a living, breathing entity, coiling around every crew member, every soldier. Thousands of lives, both human and alien, hung by the thinnest of threads, suspended over an abyss of unimaginable bloodshed. Eva watched the tactical display, the bright, aggressive indicators of her fleet's readiness, a stark contrast to the quiet, almost resigned defensive markers of the Xylosian stronghold. The anticipation of the slaughter washed over her in chilling waves, a visceral certainty that this was a moment she would forever carry, for better or worse. A soft cough broke her trance. Lieutenant Anya Sharma, one of Eva's most promising junior officers, stood rigidly beside her, her gaze fixed on the main view screen, where the Xylosian bastion loomed. Sharma, barely out of the academy, was known for her quiet efficiency and an almost unsettling idealism that the war had not yet managed to fully extinguish. Her voice, when it came, was barely a whisper, laced with an unmistakable tremor. "Captain," she began, her eyes still on the enemy fortress. The civilian reports from Kale's intel. Are they accurate? All those non-combatants?" Her question hung in the charged silence, a delicate, unspoken plea. Sharma didn't accuse, didn't directly challenge orders, but her quiet unease, her subtle reinforcement of Eva's own gnawing doubts, spoke volumes. It was a silent testament to the moral corrosion that even the most junior of officers felt, a crack in the hardened exterior of military discipline. Eva met Sharma's gaze, seeing her own internal struggle reflected in the young lieutenant's troubled eyes. That simple, desperate question hammered home the inescapable truth. This was not just a strategic decision, it was a moral abyss they were being ordered to leap into. The general's voice crackled through the calms again, sharper now, more impatient. "Rostova! Report! 1 minute to initiation. I want status confirmation." His words were a hammer blow, demanding immediate, unquestioning obedience. The weight of her command, the lives of her human troops, the historical data of the Xylosians, the terrified faces of the civilians, Thorne's unwavering order, Sharma's quiet plea, all converged into a single, agonizing point of decision. She felt the heavy weight of her own past, the loss, the anger, the desire for justice, battling against the profound, unshakable conviction that this path was wrong. Fundamentally, irrevocably wrong. To proceed was to commit an atrocity that would stain humanity's soul forever. To disobey was to condemn herself, perhaps even her loyal crew, and risk the very war continuing indefinitely. In that heart-stopping moment, poised on the precipice of war's ultimate atrocity, with the wailing klaxons echoing her own internal screams and Thorn's impatient snarl demanding her compliance, Captain Eva Rostova made a split-second decision. It was a decision born of courage, despair, and an unyielding belief in a humanity that had to be better than this. It flew in the face of everything she had been ordered to do, everything her training dictated, everything that promised her survival and continued military standing. Her jaw tightened, her eyes, previously troubled, now burned with a cold, resolute fire. She took a deep breath, the taste of recycled air metallic on her tongue, and her hand, steady and unhesitating, reached for the fleet-wide comms switch. The fate of two species, and perhaps the very definition of humanity, was about to change. The fate of two species, and perhaps the very definition of humanity, was about to change. Eva's voice, clear and resonant, cut through the static of the fleet's comms, overriding General Thorn's priority channel with an authority that left no room for doubt. Her command, delivered with an almost eerie calm, reverberated through every ship, every ground unit, silencing the cacophony of war preparations. This is Captain Eva Rostova, commanding the UNS Dauntless. To all units preparing for the Zylosian stronghold assault, hold fire. Repeat, hold fire. Prepare for a peaceful entry. We take prisoners. A stunned silence, deeper and more profound than any battle lull, fell across the entire human fleet. The klaxons, just moments ago blaring, abruptly sputtered into silence. Weapons charged and ready to unleash devastation, went cold. The air, thick with the smell of anticipation and gunpowder, suddenly felt thin, breathable. Confusion rippled through the ranks. Troopers paused, their fingers hovering over trigger mechanisms. Pilots in their cockpits stared at their screens, their faces etched with disbelief. A peaceful entry? Take prisoners? This contradicted every order, every doctrine, every brutal lesson of the Long War. Whispers, then murmurs, began to spread like wildfire. Was this a trick? A new strategy? Or had their respected, brilliant captain finally snapped under the immense pressure? Before the confusion could fully coalesce into outright insubordination from other units, General Thorn's voice, now a furious, guttural roar, tore through the comms, shaking every speaker in the fleet. His face, contorted with rage, reappeared on Eva's command screen, veins throbbing visibly on his temples. Rostova! What in the blazes are you doing? That is a direct act of insubordination. I order you to stand down immediately, acknowledge your previous orders, and proceed with the designated assault. Any further defiance will be met with immediate execution. I will personally see you court-martialed and shot for treason. His fury was palpable, a live current of violent intent that threatened to engulf them all. He didn't wait for her response. All other units, disregard Rostova's rogue command. Proceed with the attack. Breach the stronghold. Execute Operation Scorched Earth as planned. This is a direct order from General Thorn. Despite the immense pressure, the terrifying threats, and the knowledge that she had just condemned herself in the eyes of her superior, Eva remained steadfast. Her gaze never wavered from Thorn's enraged image. She calmly, yet forcefully, reiterated her command, her voice unwavering, a beacon of reasoned defiance. Against the storm of his wrath. General, with all due respect, I believe a different path is not only possible, but necessary for the future of humanity. We will not be committing genocide today. My orders stand. Hold fire. Prepare for peaceful entry. We will take prisoners. Her words hung in the air, a declaration of war against the very military structure she served. She knew the consequences intimately. She might be sacrificing her own life for this principle, for this slender chance at redemption for a species drowning in its own violence. Thorn's threats were not idle. He was a man who acted on his convictions, however brutal. Eva had faced death countless times on the battlefield, but this felt different. This was not about protecting her life. It was about protecting her soul, and perhaps, the soul of humanity itself. Her crew, though visibly shaken, looked to her, their doubt warring with their ingrained loyalty. She had just put every one of them in an impossible position, but in their eyes she saw not just fear, but a flicker of understanding, a grudging respect for the impossible stand she was taking. This wasn't merely an act of defiance. It was an act of profound, terrifying faith in a better way, a different ending to a story that seemed destined for tragedy. She had drawn a line, and now, the entire galaxy would watch to see if it held. She had drawn a line, and now, the entire galaxy would watch to see if it held. The tense silence following Eva's defiant broadcast stretched across the star systems, thick and suffocating. Other human units, caught between General Thorn's direct, furious order to proceed and Eva's unprecedented, calmly delivered counter-command, hesitated. Their tactical screens, moments ago a symphony of flashing attack vectors and weapon locks, now displayed only static. A cold war of wills had erupted over the communication channels, one that threatened to shatter the very foundation of military discipline. Confusion warred with ingrained obedience, doubt gnawed at loyalty, and the sheer audacity of Eva's insubordination created a tense, volatile standoff. The entire Terran fleet, once a cohesive, unstoppable force, became an assemblage of paralyzed warships, each captain and crew grappling with the implications of the schism that had just opened in their command structure. The war, which had seemed destined for a swift, brutal conclusion, instead hung precariously in the balance, suspended by a single, defiant human voice. Within the Xylosian stronghold, the sudden, inexplicable halt in the human assault was met with bewilderment. Their defenders, braced for the final, annihilating wave, watched with a mixture of terror and disbelief as the human warships, previously radiating destructive intent, powered down their primary weapon systems. The expected barrage never came. Instead, an eerie quiet descended, punctuated only by the distant hum of their own failing life support. Xylosian leaders, their faces etched with the strain of their imminent demise, peered through reinforced viewports, observing Eva's unit with profound uncertainty. Was this a new, more insidious tactic? A psychological torment before the final strike? Or had their desperate pleas for mercy, whispered into the void, somehow been heard? They knew humanity to be ruthless, relentless. This sudden cessation of hostilities defied all their painful experience. Eva, wasting no time, knew she had to bridge this chasm of distrust immediately. She activated a broadly accessible broadcast channel, her image appearing on every Xylosian frequency, potentially even on the internal comms within the stronghold. Her face, devoid of aggression, filled their screens. "This is Captain Eva Rostova of the Terran Confederacy. I am offering terms of surrender to the Xylosian forces within the stronghold. We will guarantee fair treatment, medical aid for your wounded, and protection for your civilian population. We seek an end to hostilities, not annihilation. Respond to this channel if you accept these terms. Let us end this war with peace, not further bloodshed." This was a radical, almost unthinkable departure from standard protocols, which typically involved demands for unconditional surrender followed by immediate disarmament, often enforced with brute displays of power. Eva offered negotiation, a promise of fair treatment from an enemy that had shown little mercy. Her words, though translated by universal communicators, carried a profound weight, resonating with an echo of hope that many Xylosians had long since abandoned. The message, delivered not with triumph or aggression, but with a quiet, unwavering resolve, filtered through the stronghold, reaching the ears of every Xylosian, from the highest-ranking elders to the lowliest civilian. It was an olive branch extended across the chasm of decades of war, a tentative, fragile invitation for a different future. The fate of both species now rested on whether the Xylosians could dare to trust the sincerity of a human's voice. The fate of both species now rested on whether the Xylosians could dare to trust the sincerity of a human's voice. Within the ancient, battered walls of the Xylosian stronghold, A fierce and desperate debate immediately erupted among the surviving leadership council. Eva's offer, broadcast across their frequency, had been an unexpected shock, a jarring dissonance against the relentless drumbeat of human aggression they had known for generations. Many were deeply distrustful, their minds scarred by decades of conflict and countless broken promises. They had witnessed humanity's cruelty firsthand, seen their cities leveled, their people driven to the brink of extinction. To them, this sudden olive branch seemed less like an act of mercy and more like a cunning, elaborate trick designed to lure them into a false sense of security, only to be butchered once their defenses were lowered. Voices rose in passionate, guttural arguments, echoing off the high, vaulted ceilings of their command chamber. To surrender to the very beings who had wrought such devastation felt like the ultimate betrayal of their ancestors, a capitulation to their destroyers. Yet, amidst the clamor of suspicion and fear, a revered Xylosian elder named Kalen, his scales faded with age and wisdom, slowly rose from his seat. Kalen had been a vocal proponent of peace even before the war, a philosopher whose teachings emphasized interdependence and the cyclical nature of conflict. He had seen empires rise and fall, witnessed the futility of endless retribution. His voice, though soft, carried an undeniable authority, silencing the younger, more bellicose generals. "We are at the precipice," Kalen stated, his multifaceted eyes sweeping over the council. "Our resources are exhausted, our warriors few, and our people starving. We have fought with honor, but even honor cannot sustain us against such overwhelming force indefinitely. This human, this Captain Rostova, offers terms that defy their established brutality. She speaks of fair treatment, of protection. Is it a trick? Perhaps. But what alternative do we possess now? Annihilation? To die fighting when a whisper of hope exists is not bravery, it is foolish pride. We have nothing left to lose by cautiously accepting. We have everything to gain if she speaks truth. This is not surrender to a conqueror, it is a desperate gamble for the survival of our species. It is our only hope." Kalen's words, born of hard-won wisdom and an unwavering commitment to the preservation of his people, resonated deeply. The council members, their faces etched with the weight of their impossible choice, exchanged hesitant glances. The sheer desperation of their situation lent Kalen's argument an undeniable power. Their backs were against the wall, and Eva's offer, however improbable, was the only door left open that didn't lead to total oblivion. After intense, agonizing deliberation, filled with moments of doubt and flickering hope, the Xylosian leaders finally, reluctantly, agreed. A collective sigh, heavy with resignation and a fragile anticipation, diffused through the command chamber. With a solemn nod, the primary communication officer activated their long-dormant long-range comms, sending out a single, terse signal of acceptance. Across the vast, silent expanse between the human fleet and the Xylosian stronghold, a fragile bridge had been built. Moments later, with a deep, grinding groan that echoed through the entire fortress, the colossal, kilometer-thick gates of the stronghold, untouched by enemy fire but battered by time and internal despair, slowly, majestically, began to open. A sliver of light, both literal and metaphorical, pierced the darkness that had enveloped their world for so long. A sliver of light, both literal and metaphorical, pierced the darkness that had enveloped their world for so long. Eva, watching from the command deck of the Dauntless, felt a profound sense of relief wash over her as the Xylosian gates slowly parted. It was a victory, not of arms, but of sheer, unyielding will to choose a different path. She immediately gave the order to her unit. "Sharma, take an advance team. Peaceful entry. Secure the perimeter, but no aggressive posturing. Medics and humanitarian aid personnel are primary. Kale, you're with me. I want immediate cultural and historical assessment of the stronghold. Let's show them we meant what we said." Her unit, a hand-picked team of soldiers who had witnessed her defiance and felt the truth of her words, moved with a quiet, efficient determination. They were a stark contrast to the heavily armed, aggressive units Thorn had envisioned. Their weapons were holstered, their demeanor was one of cautious respect, not conquest. As they stepped through the massive, groaning maw of the gate, the air was thick with ancient dust and the unspoken tension of two species meeting in an entirely new context. Xylosian combatants, gaunt and weary, emerged slowly from the shadows, their crude, ineffective weaponry laid at their feet. They offered no resistance, their faces a mixture of surprise, confusion, and a burgeoning, fragile relief. These were not the formidable, brutal enemies depicted in Terran propaganda. These were simply survivors, their eyes hollowed by fear and prolonged conflict. Eva and her advance team moved among them, disarming them gently, offering small, reassuring gestures, and dispatching medics to tend to their visible injuries. The sheer humanity of the interaction was a stark, almost painful contrast to the brutal war that had just ended. As they delved deeper into the stronghold, the true extent of the civilian population became chillingly clear. They found not hidden military caches, but throngs of Xylosian civilians, countless families huddled together in underground chambers, their eyes wide with a mixture of terror and flickering hope. Emaciated figures, their bodies frail from malnutrition, peered out from makeshift shelters. Children, thin and silent, clung to their parents, their small faces reflecting the unspeakable trauma they had endured. The air was heavy with the smell of recycled air, despair, and the faint, sweet scent of some alien antiseptic. The sight was a visceral punch to Eva's gut. These were not the monstrous aliens of the propaganda. These were sentient beings, just as vulnerable, just as capable of suffering, as any human. The sheer scale of their silent misery, the palpable relief that washed over them as they realized the humans were not there to kill them, solidified Eva's conviction. Every ounce of doubt she might have harbored about her defiance evaporated into the dusty air. This, she thought with a fierce, quiet certainty, was the righteous path. This was worth everything. This was what victory truly meant. But peace, even a fragile one, rarely comes without a price. Even as Eva was confirming the success of her audacious gamble, General Thorn, his face still a mask of incandescent fury, was already moving. He had seen the broadcast of the opening gates, perceived Eva's actions as an unforgivable betrayal, not merely of orders, but of humanity itself. His reputation shattered, his authority publicly undermined, Thorn was a cornered animal, dangerous and unpredictable. He immediately ordered a small, highly loyal strike force, hand-picked veterans whose allegiance was to him, and him alone, to move with extreme prejudice. Their mission was brutally clear: bypass Eva's position, apprehend her, and execute her on the spot for treason. He intended to quickly put down what he saw as a mutiny, eliminate the rogue captain, and then proceed with the original plan, the total annihilation of the Xylosian resistance. For Thorn, the war had not ended, it had merely been interrupted by a dangerously misguided idealist. He would not allow Eva's compassion to derail decades of strategic planning. He would restore order, whatever the cost. The relative calm of the stronghold was about to be shattered once more, but this time, the enemy would wear the same uniform. For Thorn, the war had not ended, it had merely been interrupted by a dangerously misguided idealist. He would not allow Eva's compassion to derail decades of strategic planning. He would restore order, whatever the cost. The relative calm of the stronghold was about to be shattered once more, but this time, the enemy would wear the same uniform. Eva, however, was a tactician of exceptional foresight, and she understood General Thorn's unyielding nature far too well to be caught off guard. Even as she had issued her counter-orders, a part of her mind was already calculating Thorn's inevitable, violent reaction. She anticipated his next move, knowing that a man of his rigid conviction would interpret her actions not as a strategic maneuver, but as an unforgivable betrayal. Anticipating Thorn's fury, Eva had already discreetly initiated a secondary, fleet-wide broadcast, not through official, easily censored channels, but through a secure, encrypted network often used for inter-unit reconnaissance sharing. She shared not only her direct orders to hold fire and take prisoners, but also real-time footage from within the stronghold, images of the unarmed Xylosian civilians, the emaciated children, the surrendered combatants, their faces filled with relief rather than malice. She framed it as a successful, bloodless victory, an unprecedented triumph that achieved their strategic objectives without further loss of life. Her message wasn't a plea for defiance, but a factual report of a new kind of success, a living proof that the war could end differently. She subtly highlighted the efficiency and humanity of her approach, contrasting it sharply with the projected barbarity of Thorne's "no quarter" directive. This unsanctioned broadcast, bypassing Thorne's immediate censorship, began to sow seeds of doubt, then widespread questioning, among the human forces. Many soldiers, weary from decades of dehumanizing conflict, had been operating on pure, brutal obedience, their moral compasses dulled by the ceaseless grind of war. Hearing Eva's calm voice, seeing the undeniable evidence of a bloodless surrender, witnessing the faces of the alien enemy in such vulnerable, humanizing detail, allowed a glimmer of their own lost humanity to pierce through the hardened shell of their training. The moral ambiguity of the war, so long suppressed by propaganda and Thorne's rigid ideology, became undeniable. Whispers spread like wildfire across the fleet. "Rostova did it right, she actually got them to surrender. Why are we still fighting if this is possible?" The unquestioning loyalty Thorne demanded began to fracture. Many human soldiers, those who had quietly questioned the brutal directives but lacked the courage to act, now found their own doubts reinforced by Eva's undeniable courage. They began to overtly question Thorne's harsh orders, seeing the possibility of an end to the madness that didn't involve wholesale slaughter. The tide of allegiance, previously flowing strongly in Thorne's direction, began a slow, inexorable shift. Thorne's strike force, a squad of hardened veterans loyal to his personal command, moved with ruthless efficiency through the corridors of the Zylosian stronghold, their faces grim, their weapons ready. They were on a mission to apprehend a rogue officer and restore order, a concept that, to Thorne, meant total, unquestioning compliance. They expected to find Captain Rostova surrounded by a handful of her renegade soldiers, an easy target for a quick, brutal lesson in military discipline. But as they rounded the final corner, entering the main central plaza of the stronghold, they were met with a scene that stopped them dead in their tracks. Eva stood tall and resolute in the center of the vast, echoing space. She was indeed surrounded by her loyal unit, their own weapons still holstered, their stance protective, but calm. Beside them, and filling the entire plaza, were thousands of Zylosian prisoners. Disarmed, yes, but undeniably present. They were young and old, male and female, civilian and former combatant, intermingled, a sea of alien faces now looking at the newly arrived human troops with a mixture of fear and burgeoning hope. Eva had deliberately positioned herself and her unit not just with the surrendered Zylosian combatants, but squarely within the immense civilian population, creating an impossible human shield. Thorne's strike force, trained to execute orders without hesitation, suddenly found themselves in an untenable predicament. How could they apprehend Eva, or worse, execute her on Thorne's direct command, without firing into a densely packed crowd of unarmed Zylosian civilians and their own human comrades? The moral quagmire was immediate and profound. The very victory Thorne sought now stood as an impenetrable barrier, an impossible situation of Eva's ingenious making. The very victory Thorne sought now stood as an impenetrable barrier, an impossible situation of Eva's ingenious making. Her eyes, cool and unwavering, met Thorne's furious gaze as he stepped forward, his personal guard fanning out behind him, weapons now lowered in uncertain defiance. The general was a picture of barely contained rage, his face a mottled purple. "Rostova!" he snarled, his voice echoing unnaturally in the cavernous stronghold. "This is madness! This is treason! Surrender now and face your court-martial with what little dignity you have left!" Eva took a slow, deliberate breath, her voice calm and firm, cutting through the general's bluster. "General, I have achieved the war's objective. The Zylosian resistance has ended. Their commanders have surrendered. Their remaining forces are disarmed. Their civilian population is secured. All without further bloodshed. This is not defiance, this is success. More than success, General. This is the first true act of peace between our species. My actions have not prolonged the war, they have ended it. They have paved the way for a future that your orders would have utterly destroyed. She gestured around the vast chamber, encompassing the thousands of Xylosians and her own troops. Look around you, General. This is what victory looks like when it's built on something other than corpses. The standoff crackled with an almost unbearable tension. Thorn's hand instinctively went to his sidearm, but his loyalists, for the first time, hesitated. They saw the scene before them, a sea of alien faces, vulnerable yet hopeful, intermingled with their own comrades who stood silently, unflinching, beside Eva. The image Eva had broadcast, of a bloodless surrender, was now undeniably real, a living, breathing testament to her words. The moral high ground, once firmly in Thorn's grasp through rigid military doctrine, had shifted. His orders to open fire now seemed grotesque, an act of unprovoked slaughter against a surrendered population. And then, subtly at first, the tide began to turn. Over the fleet's comms, which Eva had deliberately left open, voices began to filter through, not Thorn's subordinates, but captains of other units, their tones hesitant but firm. General Thorn. One voice cut in, Captain Valerius of the UNS Vindicator. My unit reports Xylosian surrender confirmed. No hostile activity detected. Requesting clarification on new orders, sir. Captain Rostova's actions appear to have secured the objective. Another followed, Captain Chen of the UNS Bastion. General, my forces are holding position. Further engagement with a surrendered population seems counterproductive. We await your revised directives. The murmurs grew louder, filtering into the stronghold itself. The soldiers from Thorn's strike force, their initial zeal wavering, exchanged glances. They weren't just hearing reports, they were seeing the faces of their fellow human soldiers, their comrades, standing with Eva. The possibility of an honorable end to the war, a resolution without the final, horrifying atrocity, became a tangible reality. They saw the possibility of a just resolution, a future where they could return home not as executioners, but as peacekeepers. The collective refusal was not outright mutiny, but a firm, quiet questioning, an unwillingness to commit an act that now seemed utterly indefensible. Thorn's authority, once absolute, began to crumble under the weight of this collective, moral insubordination. He was losing control, not just of the situation, but of his entire fleet. Seizing the moment, Eva knew she had to bypass Thorn entirely. Her intelligence officer, Sergeant Kale, had anticipated this, preparing a direct, encrypted channel to the Terran Confederacy leadership, a channel designed for critical, planet-side reports that bypassed normal chain-of-command protocols in extreme emergencies. Kale. Eva commanded, her voice cutting through the rising tension. Transmit everything. Full report, real-time visuals, the Xylosian surrender terms, evidence of the civilian population, all of it, directly to the Confederacy High Command. Priority 1. Let them see what has truly transpired here. Kale, already at his station, nodded grimly, his fingers flying across his console. The data stream, a torrent of truth, began its journey across the stars, carrying Eva's detailed report of actions and the Xylosian surrender, along with undeniable evidence of the civilian population, directly to the highest echelons of power. The fate of Xylos, and indeed the future of galactic relations, was no longer in Thorn's hands, or even entirely in Eva's. It was now in the hands of the entire Confederacy. The fate of Xylos, and indeed the future of galactic relations, was no longer in Thorn's hands, or even entirely in Eva's. It was now in the hands of the entire Confederacy. News of Captain Rostova's unprecedented actions, filtered through her direct, unfiltered report and corroborated by the growing unrest within the fleet, hit the Terran Confederacy leadership like a seismic shockwave. They were an organization already stretched thin by decades of war, their resources dwindling, their political factions increasingly divided on the war's ultimate goals. Some hardliners, like Thorn, advocated for total victory at any cost, while others, exhausted by the endless conflict, sought any viable exit strategy, even one that involved a negotiated peace. Eva's actions, bold and utterly outside protocol, presented them with an unprecedented situation, a fait accompli that forced them to confront the moral implications of their long-held war doctrine head-on. The images Eva transmitted, the peaceful surrender, the unarmed Zylosian civilians, the quiet dignity of the Zylosian elder, painted a picture that starkly contradicted the dehumanizing propaganda that had fueled the war for so long. The sheer scale of the bloodless victory, achieved by one defiant captain, offered a tantalizing alternative to endless carnage. It wasn't just a military report, it was a moral challenge, a mirror reflecting the ugliness of their own policies. The council chambers of the Confederacy, usually echoing with hawkish rhetoric, were filled with a tense, contemplative silence. Adding another layer of profound impact, the Zylosian elder, Kalin, leveraging Eva's secured communication channels, broadcasted a heartfelt plea directly to the Terran Confederacy. His voice, ancient and resonant, carried across the vastness of space, traversing the cultural chasm that had separated their species for generations. He spoke not of victory or defeat, but of sorrow for the war's immense toll, on both sides. He acknowledged the pain humanity had suffered, expressed regret for the Zylosian role in the conflict, and articulated a profound hope for a future of coexistence, not as conquerors and conquered, but as neighbors in a shared galaxy. His words were devoid of aggression, filled instead with a weary wisdom and a yearning for peace that resonated deeply with many on the Confederacy Council, particularly those who had lost loved ones in the protracted struggle. It was a raw, unfiltered call for an end to the cycle of violence, a vision of a future where both species could find a place. Faced with this overwhelming confluence of events, widespread insubordination within its own fleet, the undeniable evidence of a bloodless surrender, and a heartfelt plea for peace from the very enemy they had vowed to eradicate, the Terran Confederacy leadership had no choice but to act decisively. General Thorne, his extreme ideology now exposed as a dangerous liability that threatened to ignite a civil war within their own ranks, was swiftly relieved of command. The order came down with swift, brutal efficiency, bypassing his staff and reaching him directly via secure channel, even as he stood fuming in the Zylosian stronghold. His face, already contorted with rage, paled as the words registered. His extreme ideology, once the foundation of his career, was now utterly rejected, denounced as an existential threat to the stability of the Confederacy. His era of unyielding, genocidal war was over, brought to an ignominious end by the courage of one captain and the quiet, collective refusal of a weary fleet. The weight of his own monstrous ambition had finally crushed him. The war, for the first time in decades, truly began to shift its course, steered away from total war toward an uncertain, but hopeful, peace. The war, for the first time in decades, truly began to shift its course, steered away from total war toward an uncertain, but hopeful, peace. With General Thorne's downfall secured, the fighting across Xylos ceased entirely. A fragile, tense peace descended upon the embattled planet, its quietude punctuated only by the distant hum of relief operations instead of weapon fire. Eva, despite the very real possibility of facing a court-martial for her extreme insubordination, found herself in an unprecedented position. Though condemned by some hardliners within the Confederacy as a rogue, a traitor who had undermined military discipline, she was, to an ever-growing number, hailed as a hero. Her image, once that of a stern military tactician, had softened, becoming a symbol of hope, a testament to the belief that even in the darkest hours of conflict, a different path was not only possible, but achievable. The whispers of mutineer were increasingly drowned out by the shouts of savior. Emergency humanitarian aid, swift and massive in scale, was immediately dispatched to Xylos. Cargo ships, once outfitted for war material, now carried food, medical supplies, and shelter components. Human and Xylosian representatives, their faces still etched with the war's trauma, began initial, highly guarded talks in a specially designated demilitarized zone. These were not negotiations between equals, nor were they free from suspicion. Decades of animosity, fueled by fear and bloodshed, could not be erased overnight. However, Eva's bold, defiant actions served as the crucial icebreaker. Her established trust with the Xylosian leadership, particularly Elder Kalin, and Her unique moral standing within the human fleet provided an essential, if fragile, bridge between the two deeply traumatized species. She became an indispensable, reluctant facilitator, translating not just language, but intent and emotion, helping both sides navigate the treacherous landscape of post-war diplomacy. The seeds of change, though sown in defiance and watered with risk, began to take root. Eva's refusal to fire on the alien prisoners, an act that had nearly cost her everything, became more than just an event. It transformed into a powerful symbol, a resonant testament to the profound idea that even in the most brutal, dehumanizing wars, humanity could choose a different path. It offered proof that empathy, compassion, and the courage to uphold a higher moral truth could indeed rewrite the grim narrative of conflict. Her single act of defiance became a touchstone, a silent rebuke to the doctrine of absolute victory through absolute destruction. It forced both species to look inward, to question the justifications for their hatred, and to imagine a future where coexistence wasn't merely a dream, but a tangible, if difficult, goal. The universe, which had braced itself for another chapter of endless war, instead found itself witnessing the fragile, tentative dawn of an uncertain peace, all because one human captain refused to pull the trigger. The universe, which had braced itself for another chapter of endless war, instead found itself witnessing the fragile, tentative dawn of an uncertain peace, all because one human captain refused to pull the trigger. This immediate peace, however, was not without its profound challenges. Decades of ingrained animosity and the raw suffering inflicted on both sides could not be erased overnight, or even within a few short months. The scars of war ran deep, not just on the ravaged landscapes of Xylos, but in the collective psyches of both species. Suspicion lingered like a stubborn mist, and distrust was a default setting for many, making every step towards reconciliation feel like navigating a minefield. The Xylosians, while grateful for their salvation, harbored generations of resentment towards humanity, seeing them as the aggressors, the destroyers of their world. Humans, on the other hand, remembered the terror of the initial Xylosian incursions, the losses they had endured, and the propaganda that had painted the aliens as irredeemable monsters. The road ahead was long, fraught with potential setbacks, and demanded an almost superhuman level of patience and understanding from all involved. In this delicate, post-conflict landscape, Eva Rostova found herself thrust into an unforeseen and incredibly demanding role. Having been cleared of any charges by a narrowly divided Confederacy Council, her actions ultimately deemed a strategic stroke of genius that saved countless human lives and resources, rather than an act of treason, she became instrumental in the initial peace negotiations. Her moral authority, born from her courageous defiance, and her unique understanding of both human military objectives and the Xylosian plight, placed her in an unparalleled position. She was, in essence, the only link of genuine trust between two deeply scarred species. Eva, the pragmatic military captain, was now a reluctant ambassador, her diplomatic skills honed not in academies, but in the brutal crucible of war. She bridged the vast cultural and emotional gap, explaining human motivations to the Xylosians, and Xylosian perspectives to the often rigid human delegates. She found herself mediating disputes over territorial claims, resource allocation, and the proper way to approach reparations for the devastation wrought. It was a role she never sought, but one she embraced with the same unwavering resolve she had shown on the battlefield. Her voice, once used to command troops, now sought common ground, translating complex grievances into terms both sides could, eventually, understand. The legacy of Eva's single act of defiance began to ripple outward, slowly but surely reshaping the future trajectories of both humanity and the Xylosians. Her refusal to fire became the foundational stone upon which a new, cautious relationship was painstakingly built. It wasn't an immediate transformation, but a gradual, organic process. Initially, human aid workers and Xylosian citizens interacted with apprehension, but over time, shared tasks and common goals began to erode the ingrained prejudices. Cultural exchange programs were tentatively established, with Xylosian scholars studying human art and literature, and human linguists delving into the ancient Xylosian philosophical texts Eva had unknowingly helped to preserve. scientific collaborations began, focusing on rebuilding Xylos's ecosystem and sharing technological advancements. The healing process was slow, arduous, and punctuated by moments of renewed suspicion and anger. Old wounds festered, and the ghosts of the past often threatened to derail progress. However, whenever tensions flared, Eva's story was retold, serving as a powerful reminder that compassion and understanding were possible, even in the face of unimaginable conflict. It became a new narrative, a counterpoint to the decades of hatred. Textbooks in both human and Xylosian schools began to feature Eva Rostova, not as a warrior, but as a peacemaker, a testament to the power of individual conscience. Her legacy wasn't just about saving lives. It was about saving the potential for a shared future. It demonstrated that true strength didn't lie in the capacity for destruction, but in the courage to choose empathy. This profound shift, initiated by one woman's impossible choice, began to redefine what it meant to be a sentient civilization in the vast, interconnected galaxy. A future that once seemed destined for eternal enmity was now open to the possibility of genuine, if hard-won, coexistence. A future that once seemed destined for eternal enmity was now open to the possibility of genuine, if hard-won, coexistence. The war, a grueling, decades-long nightmare that had consumed generations, officially ended not with a final, devastating blow, but with a handshake. It was a hesitant gesture, to be sure, performed in a neutral zone carved out from the Xylosian wastelands, between a weary Terran Confederacy diplomat and a stoic Elder Kalen. This handshake, broadcast across the galaxy, symbolized much more than a truce. It was the fragile foundation upon which a new era of cautious cooperation would begin. It was built substantially on the bedrock of Eva Rostova's courage, an individual act that had irrevocably altered the course of galactic history, proving that even the most deeply entrenched conflicts could be de-escalated and transformed. The ensuing Galactic Accord, formalized in the Xylosian Peace Treaty, acknowledged the sovereignty of both species and established frameworks for trade, cultural exchange, and mutual defense, all contingent upon a continued commitment to non-aggression and mutual respect. The narrative of this unprecedented peace reflects profoundly on the immense impact of individual courage and empathy, especially when faced with overwhelming pressure to conform to destructive norms. Eva's defiance taught a powerful lesson. True strength often lies not in the capacity for destruction, nor in the relentless pursuit of vengeance, but in the unwavering refusal to be consumed by hatred. Her single, pivotal decision, made under the threat of court-martial and execution, had prevented an atrocity that would have forever stained humanity's soul and extinguished an entire civilization. It demonstrated that leadership isn't solely about command and control, but also about moral vision and the willingness to risk everything for a cause greater than oneself. Her actions forced both humans and Xylosians to confront their own prejudices, to question the manufactured villains, and to see each other not as abstract enemies, but as complex, intelligent beings capable of both great cruelty and profound compassion. On Xylos, the rebuilding began in earnest, a testament to a shared future that had once seemed impossible. Human engineering teams, working alongside Xylosian architects and environmental scientists, commenced the monumental task of rehabilitating the ravaged planet. Desalination plants, powered by new, jointly developed fusion technology, began to purify the contaminated oceans. Terraforming initiatives, utilizing cutting-edge bioengineering, revitalized sterile landscapes, coaxing life back into barren soil. Ancient Xylosian cities, once crumbling monuments to human fury, were meticulously restored, often with human assistance, blending traditional Xylosian aesthetics with advanced Terran construction techniques. The process was slow, painstaking, and often challenging, but it was driven by an unprecedented spirit of collaboration. The Xylosian people, once refugees in their own homeworld, gradually returned to their restored cities, their fears slowly giving way to a cautious optimism. Their children, who had known only war and deprivation, now played in parks where bombs once fell, their laughter echoing a new sound of peace. Xylos, once a symbol of humanity's capacity for destruction, became a beacon of its capacity for redemption. It grew into a verdant, thriving planet once more, not just an alien world, but a shared home, a monument to the understanding that even after decades of war, healing was possible. This transformation was a direct consequence of Eva Rostova's refusal to fire, a powerful, living embodiment of her belief that compassion could triumph over conflict, proving that sometimes, the greatest act of war is to refuse to fight. Her story, preserved in the annals of both species, served as a perpetual reminder that peace is not merely the absence of war, but the active cultivation of empathy, understanding, and the unwavering courage to choose a better path. What other moments in history, or in the speculative futures we explore, have been defined by such profound choices? How often do individuals, standing at the precipice of destiny, choose a path less destructive, forever altering the course of civilizations? Share your thoughts and reflections on Eva's story and other tales of moral courage in the comments below. We love hearing your perspectives on the forces that shape our world, both real and imagined. If you found this story compelling, a narrative of defiance, desperation, and ultimately, an improbable peace, then don't forget to hit that like button to support our channel. Subscribe for more epic tales from the annals of humanity's most pivotal moments, and click the bell icon so you don't miss our next adventure into the vast unknowns of existence. Your engagement helps us continue unearthing these incredible stories.